Do we have a lot of followers on YouTube?
Oh, so many.
No, really, do we have any?
I don't know.
Has anybody ever watched a policy meeting on YouTube?
We've
Is
had
this
some
still going to John's
attendees.
channel?
We've had some attendees.
It is still going to my channel. It was a little bit confusing, the sort of chain back and forth about, can we get on that? And it was like, yes.
Of course we can. Does that mean you're doing it?
Did you do it? Because that's what we're asking for. Is not like, can we, but will you? But yeah. Anyways, so we'll get that squared away. But for now, we are live on YouTube and
At John Stinson.
Yes, on John Stinson's ER9 YouTube account. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, there we go. So call to order this special meeting of the Easton Reading Region 9 Joint Boards of Education Policy Committee at 9:08 a.m. on October 23rd, 2020. First order of business, in attendance, Chris Parkin, Maureen Williams, and Gwen Denny. First order of business, approval of minutes from the October 2nd, 2020. I just want to make sure I have the right one up. October 2nd, 2020 meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move that we approve both sets of minutes, the October 2nd and 16th minutes.
I think that's fine. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Here's our October 2nd. Here's our October 16th. Hearing no call for discussion, we will vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous, 4-0. Excellent. All right, moving on to public comment. Seeing no members of the public present, we'll move on to committee member comment. Any comments? Okay. Hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item number 5. A, the tri-district governance. Chris, do you, sort of the latest wording we had copied into the document last time we met? Yep. There's been no additional sort of edits or comments?
Not by me.
Yep. All right, good. Give me one moment and I will bring that up. Okay, I believe this is it right here. Primer on the tri-board. Okay, so here we have principles, policies, and meeting governance as the 3 major sections. There's also a blurb here about the recruitment of the superintendent, which I think will be sort of relevant to the conversation as well. So, I think what we're trying to do is to dive into this conversation and figure out, sort of the right guidance for our respective boards, and I think that's coming up this next Tuesday, the tri-board. And making sure that we have an opportunity to sort of present as close to a recommendation as we can come to today. But I think there's at least one particularly timely issue on the subject of the sort of advice versus sort of recruiting or interview process, and sort of forming a committee and all of that stuff for employees at central office beyond the superintendent. Are there any comments related to sort of the overall process before we dive in and start talking about some of those specific policies?
I mean, just to be clear, is the goal to get to a point this morning where we are formally moving with a recommendation that this or some similar document of principles and overarching ideals is presented to the tri-board as the recommendation of this committee?
I hope that we can accomplish that. I would also say that there's a bit of a territorial, there's a bit of a land dispute as well, because the charge of the Joint Negotiating Committee includes a sort of resolution to
one of these questions.
Yeah, exactly, to that sort of most timely question.
Right.
So I think we could come up with a recommendation. I think the joint negotiating committee could come up with a recommendation as well. And I think that's probably what's going to happen. So I would hope that we'd come up with some thinking on that, and seeing that 3 of the 4 members of this committee are also members of the joint negotiating committee, I think, we can help to hold the thread and help people to understand what the thinking is.
I think what you have to do is distinguish between broad overarching principles and execution of same. And you have to leave room in your broad overarching principles for more narrow views on how same are executed. It's like having a statute and having CFR regs, right?
Right.
That'd be my legal analogy.
Right.
The CFR regs are going to dig down into the weeds, and the statute is going to say, broadly speaking, this is our direction. So we are at the broadly speaking, this is our direction, if not even higher at somewhat aspirational.
Yeah.
We basically, we agree these are joint employees, and then we all have to have some kind of a joint understanding of how those are hired, the mechanics of which are delegated to this other committee, basically.
Yeah.
I would agree with that the mechanics are delegated to the other committee. I just don't want what happens is it to really end up in a, no, this is my view, this is my view, this is my view, such that that other committee should be sitting here and vice versa.
Yeah.
Effective when, because then we're wasting our time.
Right. We're gonna have the same conversation again in 12 hours.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah,
Right.
basically 6:30 or 7.
And I think it's 7.
I
Yeah,
lost the thread on that. Sorry.
I think 7 o'clock. Okay.
Okay.
I think it might be useful for us to just go through each one briefly, and then come back and sort of circle around to anything that we find controversial. So does that sound reasonable?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So number 1, ER9 structure exists to facilitate the sharing of superintendent and senior staff between 3 independent school districts. This includes, but is not limited to, a shared central office budget that is allocated amongst the boards.
It also exists, and this doesn't need to be in here, but to facilitate, positive educational experiences among students. So if this is the real aspirational look down, that would need to be in there. And I don't know how this wants to be portrayed moving out of this committee, but
Yeah.
we have some aspirational views.
Yeah. And I think in some degrees, the 4th bullet
It covers it. Yep.
is at that. Yeah.
It might make more sense to make the first
So
bullet
flip
the
them.
first bullet.
Yeah.
Flip them.
Right. And put the educational vision and mission first, basically, and then the operational comes second.
Yeah. And I would put the tri-board as not its own legal entity as the last of those bullets.
Okay.
People focus on what they read first, It's true.
Good. Okay. So just to make sure we're all sort of clear for the ones that we didn't read yet, it is in the best interest of all students in the 3 districts for ER9 to operate as closely to a single 5 school district as is reasonably possible. Effort should be made to horizontally and vertically align curriculum to that end to improve both efficiency and performance. Okay. We already read the next one. Its value rests in the decision by 3 boards to cooperate and increase municipal ROI by sharing resources, and the tri-board is not its own legal entity. So we find these to be uncontroversial amongst the sort of the educated.
Yes.
Right? People who understand what we're trying to do would say, yes, I agree. Okay, good. Policies. Superintendent is the CEO of each of the 3 districts. She or he is an employee of the 3 boards. Good. The superintendent.
This
Right.
second sentence, I know you're reading out loud, and I tend to jump into things when
No,
I
good.
think there's controversy, John,
Yep.
so you're going to forgive me.
No,
This
not
is
at
going
all.
to start to give us problems.
Okay. Superintendent has broad discretion to hire staff throughout the 3 districts or to delegate that authority to other appropriate individuals.
I think we're going to have to get this micro analyzed to classify staff.
Yeah. Okay.
At this point.
I'm just going to highlight that, and we're going to come back.
Okay.
The superintendent shall meet and confer with the 3 boards in the hiring of the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, the director. So I think this same thing, right? This is
Same
all
thing.
really a part of the same sort of question. The board shall give advice to the superintendent of these hiring decisions, which advice shall be duly considered. Okay, so same thing, and we're going to use this yellow.
And to get this by, you're going to have to say the boards will always act in conformity with statutes or something along those lines, or the boards will always act in conformity with Connecticut law, something.
Yep.
Because that's going to give people who are nervous about whatever language is decided on the backstop of saying we're not writing around whatever those statutes say.
Yep. To the extent the boards are dissatisfied with one or more of the hiring decisions, okay, I think same thing.
Same thing.
Yep. Okay. So the whole piece here. Wait, maybe the last. The boards have delegated the role of negotiating terms of employment with senior central office staff to the joint negotiating committee. That I don't think that's necessarily controversial, is it?
I think that would probably be passed. Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's just a statement of fact, basically.
Yeah. Okay. Meeting governance.
I mean, I think the only thing with that last bullet is that someone might arguably say, subject to ratification by the boards,
That's true.
Yeah,
because it's not a wholesale authority delegation.
Yeah.
It's a recommendation.
right.
That's true.
With the something about like with the final
Subject to
contract.
ratification by the boards or something
Okay.
like
Just
that.
so that works.
By the boards.
Bye.
Okay. Meetings of the three boards jointly should be chaired in an annual rotation. I think we've covered that before and don't find that to be controversial. Motions must be made and carried by all three boards separately. Tri-board meetings are three boards meeting jointly, except where otherwise set forth herein. Motions must be approved separately by each of the three boards to be considered approved. Now we have the mechanism. I can imagine this being.
Sorry, John, I might go back to the other one, except where otherwise set forth above motions affecting tri-district matters or motions affecting all three boards. Because in theory, you could sit in a tri-board meeting and approve something we rejected and it still is applicable to you.
Yeah. Okay, and then we have the mechanism. I mean, I know this has been past practice, but because it hasn't been enshrined in policy, I can imagine this is the first time a lot of people are hearing it or paying attention to it and they have an issue with it.
Right. And I think it's going to have an issue outside of here.
Yeah. The purpose of joint meetings, carry out business that relates to sharing resources between the districts, including but not limited to the central office budget, take action on the recommendations of joint committees, improve efficiency by consolidating presentations and other reports that contain information applicable to all three boards in substantially equal part, such that it is only presented once rather than separately to all three boards. And then finally, the joint boards should endeavor to keep their role and appropriate focus both with respect to governance generally and with respect to the subset of that governance that is properly within the jurisdiction of the boards acting jointly. Okay. Recruitment of the superintendent. The chairperson of each of the three boards shall together define a timeline and methodology for hiring a superintendent in an appropriately expedient fashion. The chairs shall appoint a personnel search committee with equal representation from the towns of Easton and Reading. Do we think this is controversial? This actually doesn't strike me as controversial. Oh, there's more. The committee may, in its discretion, recommend that the boards retain the services of a consultant to assist in the process. Okay, so would we say, you know, this sort of piece for recruitment of the superintendent, it occurs to me it belongs up with the policies where we're talking about hiring and negotiating?
I think
it occurs to me it's hiring of the superintendent, not just recruitment as its title.
And I think the issue is going to be that the chairs cannot form a personnel search committee. The boards need to form the committee and formally name themselves a PSC before the chairs can appoint anybody to it.
Okay. So the boards, I was going to say may, but shall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how do we do, because what we do is we're all the committee, all 20 of us are the committee, and then there's like the subcommittee that
Right.
we all have to be the committee so we can have executive sessions. I don't know, have any idea how to put that in words.
Right. I mean, to the extent that you want to have non-meetings amongst 21. You need a PSC of 21. You don't need to, in every instance, say that everybody's on a PSC. That's been practiced, though.
Right.
Form
I mean,
a,
the board shall form a personnel search committee, which may be a committee of the whole. Because the personnel search committee cannot, under the current structure, have equal representation in both towns because we have one more board member in Reading than Easton.
right.
It'll always be 11 to 10 if it's all 21.
Ah,
Could we say, I mean, I think it's worth pointing out the subcommittee structure that we used before.
You could say, in addition, a personnel search committee, steering committee shall be appointed with equal representation in both towns. And I mean, this whole paragraph could lead to 4 hours of discussion.
Right.
easily.
Like,
I mean, honestly, this document is going to lead to more discussion than the rest of the policy work we've
Right.
done combined.
That's right.
yeah. Like we could finish the entire policy book and the entire discussion could be 20 minutes. This is going to be hours.
Right. Are you certain you want to advance this to the next tri-board meeting and discuss it there? Because I think it needs, personally speaking, more refinement. And I think that how the meeting tonight evolves and shifts and changes may inform how you then wish to go forward with this.
I think that might be right. And I also think it would, when do we meet again next? That
This group, Fridays, it's standing.
no, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm sorry. I mean the tri-boards. Is that
Chris would probably have that in his memory.
February?
January.
January, okay. I think that might be a better fit. Because I think we're trying to do too much at once if we're trying to refine this language, get everybody to agree, work through everything that we need to do for the negotiating committee, et cetera.
I think the issue is when the streams cross, you create a problem. And working on this in a vacuum outside of a live problem made
Yes.
sense.
Yeah.
And it made sense early in
That's
Dr.
right.
Harrison's tenure to set the ground rules. Here's our first regular tri-board meeting, all 21 of us, the new superintendent. Here are the ground rules, so we're all on the same page.
That's
The
right.
fact that we have basically a live dispute now creates automatic tension in what's being read into this. And the idea that
Absolutely.
what's being written here is trying to influence that process,
I
which
think
it's not, but
I know that it's not, but conversely so, it also refines your thinking when you have a live problem
Agreed.
that forces you to look at the broad language.
Yep.
It's
Right.
very refining. You all know that. So
Yep. Yep. Okay. So I think we're in Eastern.
So glad I'm not on that committee.
but you love joining us every Friday morning. You know, we are the standing source of humor when
I love how we don't meet at, what are you guys meeting at 6:30 on a Friday night? That's neat.
yes.
Seven.
Seven.
Evan, I'm still confused about that. I actually wrote that down because
Yeah. My wife is really thrilled with that. Like, weren't you on until 3 a.m. last Friday? Like, no, it's a different. That was a different committee.
or the
Oh my
one the
God.
other night that I thought I was signing on for an hour, and 2.5 hours in, I was like, oh boy.
Okay. So I think we'll committee may, in its discretion, recommend the board's retain the services of a consultant to assist in the process. I think I'm just going to grab this. Let me see if I have anything else. If I could grab that and bring it up to policy.
it almost becomes the second bullet.
I think
Here's what
that's
the
right.
superintendent is. Here's what the superintendent is selected.
Yep.
You know, and you can sort of put a preface instead of that first, that, you know, when there's a vacancy for the superintendency, comma, you know,
Okay. All right, good. I think that actually accurately reflects what we did in the last round, and I think it's a good place to say, where do people find pain, and if they, if there's any part of this that, based on that recent experience that we want to edit, we can talk about that. But I think a lot of people would say that it was actually a reasonable process, and it worked well, and let's just enshrine it in policy, but we'll see. Okay. Seeing that we're not planning on advancing this to the tri-boards, I don't feel like, like we have to bottom out on this. We can certainly continue to talk about this now, or we can move on to sort of working through the 3000 series. Is there a preference for committee members?
I think the 3000 series would probably be more productive at this point, because I think the meeting this evening is going to inform the way in which this work is structured. That doesn't mean that it's a question of whether we're the preface to that, or that's a preface to this, or it's
Right.
intertwined. And I just think we could be spinning our wheels and coming back and doing it again.
John, you probably know, what's the agenda? What does the posted agenda say for tonight? In other words, is
Go
this
to
work
executive
permissible?
session. Go to executive session to discuss negotiation.
Right. So none of this work is even permissible on that agenda.
That's right. Yeah, to come up with I think our charge said that we would meet and come up with a
Process.
Seeing as how we're in the middle of a process, where the agenda item is to actually sort of do the negotiating, not to come up with a process. So we'll have to schedule another special meeting of that group to talk about the process, which, I don't want to leave tonight without us having a date for doing that.
I think we can possibly look at this yellow language a little bit and articulate the 30,000 foot view of really who is responsible for what, and articulate in that the process is to be defined and recommended by the negotiating committee and refined as from time to time might be required at their recommendation to be ratified by the three boards pursuant to their charge, and also sort of create this general framework of here's what we consider to be senior level people, and here's what we consider to be the aspirational expectation that the three boards are working together to hire them.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think it actually would be helpful for us to be able to, if the question comes up tonight, we can be very clear, this is not a part of the agenda and not something we can discuss in executive session. But the policy committee has done some thinking on this, and see video found here to see what we discussed. We'll have another session to dive into that at another time. Okay, so if we look at this a little bit, and I actually think it makes a lot of sense for us to just sort of tease out some of the issues and sort of concerns that we might face. So first, because now we're talking about the hiring of sort of senior folks, we've just articulated a process for the superintendent. I don't know that we're saying do this when there's a vacancy for any cabinet level official, do this, but that might be the position of some people.
Yeah, I mean, what you might say is when there's a vacancy for a cabinet level position, however you want to define it, the superintendent shall notify the three chairs, and the three chairs shall be responsible for notifying their boards, and the process in place that was, the process previously ratified by the three boards shall be put into motion. Yeah. The issue is that process doesn't exist yet.
Having talked to Rich Mills, it is very clear to me that we want to define that process.
Yeah, I think.
But the question is, who's defining it?
We all are. I mean, we all are as individual boards and then collectively. So it is very clear to me that we want not only to define that, but some level of specificity. So we don't revisit this animal when you lose people because of elections or whatever.
I could not agree more.
This is not what you want to revisit. So yeah. even in writing this in a governance document, which I see as a level up from where we were before, we have some levels of issue because we're going to get really granular at some point. Does it belong here?
I mean, I think, Chris, the point that the charge of the joint negotiating committee sort of calls on that committee to do this, but that committee hadn't met at all since, before this week. And yet we're meeting every week. Like, I don't think we can just say, well, it's to you, and we'll let you guys get to it when you get to it. You guys being us guys. So I don't think it's a bad idea for us to say, here's what we think the process should be. And if when we meet with that committee to talk about this subject, people disagree, fine. Like,
I mean, in theory, the policy committee can draft a process that it recommends to the joint negotiating committee,
right?
And then the joint negotiating committee can do with as it pleases.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah, that's what I think. Yeah, I like that. So let's take a swing at that. Yeah. Okay. So first idea here, we have a process. It's broad, but it does highlight, like, there's going to be a committee. Is there interest in saying it's not just the superintendent, it's all cabinet level? And by cabinet level, I mean essentially the superintendent and their direct reports.
I think you separate out the superintendent.
Yeah,
I think
you have to.
clearly, I think you have to. Clearly, that is the one unquestionable hire that is done by the boards.
Okay.
Irrespective of what you view Rich Mills having said, or what discretion you want to have with others, that is on its own level.
And on the question of discretion, I think we're being told that we're not hemmed in by statute.
Correct.
That we could write here, the superintendent can hire anybody they want without consulting the board, period.
I think that there's some level of non-broad discretion with respect to not people like Scott. I think we could write in anything we want with respect to Scott's role.
Certified staff have different statutory tricks.
Right.
But okay, so we actually need to get into that sort of certified staff.
Well, I think it depends the level of interest that we have in getting involved, because there are some manners of intervention that would be permissible for certified and non-certified, and there are others that would create different levels of tension.
Yep.
I mean, it's a decision tree where the first question is, do we agree that the board should be involved directly in these hires? If so, to what degree? If so, in what way?
Right.
Because each of those forecloses something else.
Yeah.
Right. I think we should, quite frankly, stick to the superintendent, because I think coming out of here, you're going to want more granularity that says something along the lines of, the board shall approve the contract, the board shall have negotiating with respect to the terms of the contract, kind of granularity.
Once somebody is selected,
up as to superintendent before we move down to those roles. So I guess what I'm saying is I don't think we've finished the language on superintendent.
Okay, let's do that. All right, so
I think we have to make some comment about how the contract is negotiated and how the contract is ratified by all three boards. And how you want to say that, I don't know, but I think it's going to have to be in there, particularly given the emphasis on these issues.
Yeah, I mean, you could really nail it down and say, step one, the superintendent notifies the chairs of the vacancy. Step two, the chairs discuss a timeline and methodology. Step three, the boards meet jointly to appoint themselves a personnel search committee. Step four, the personnel search committee appoints a steering committee. Step five, the steering committee makes a recommendation as to whether or not to hire a consultant. Step six, the entire PSC endorses this. Step seven, the tri-boards approve a contract with a search consultant. Step eight, the search consultant posts the job. The job description is or is not run by the personnel search committee.
I think you want that, quite frankly. I mean, it sounds overkill in light of the way that this is broad here in general, but I frankly think you want.
I think that there are many worse things than having a formula and a direct script that we can hammer out now in the absence of a live superintendent search, so that we can have the debate now. So we're not having the debate, hopefully never again.
Yeah, well, and it could be really nice if we can write the language in such a way that it's modular. We may say that one, and that one apply to cabinet level folks too. So, all right, superintendent vacancy and hiring. So, step one, right?
Go back to dictating, Chris.
Superintendent.
Pull the tape back.
Yep.
Notify.
That's not even necessarily true. If we fire the superintendent, we're notifying him. When there is a vacancy for the superintendent, you can almost start with the next one.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
Because the superintendent doesn't necessarily control when the superintendent creates a vacancy.
Do we have language in existing policy about how the process is supposed to happen? So I ask because there's policy in our bylaws that talks about when a board member resigns, and the superintendent is supposed to notify the town clerk and like all that stuff. That didn't happen last year.
I believe that there is language in one of the policies that we looked at, like in February with Tom, that we talked about this a little bit.
Yeah.
But I don't think that policy exists in any current actual documents.
So could we say, upon resignation, the superintendent will notify the 3 board chairs, who will notify their board members? Right, and then we can say, obviously, there's,
And it's not even upon resignation, it's upon notice of resignation, because the resignation will be 90 days later.
But does it matter how the vacancy was created? Resignation, fire, termination, et cetera? Is that relevant? It's just there's a vacancy, right?
I'm concerned about the folks who are crying foul when, like, wait, when did Tom give notice versus this thing? Like, enshrine the whole process, right? And like leave very little doubt about what is supposed to happen.
I mean, you can almost go one level up. A superintendent's vacancy occurs when the superintendent gives his notice of resignation or retirement, the contract is mutually terminated, or the board, terminates the superintendent. Then when a vacancy occurs, if the superintendent resigns or retires, he shall notify the chairs or shall notify their boards promptly or something.
Okay, superintendent vacancy occurs when, and we're going to have, do we have 3 items here?
When superintendent gives notice of his resignation or retirement.
I'm telling you guys, Cabe is going to look to us for this language.
Yeah.
Free membership for life. That's the.
Yep.
Superintendent
The
vacancy.
boards terminate his employment.
Do you have to say upon good cause? Do you have to say that, or they?
I would just say terminate his employment because the contract from time to time might change what the definition is.
Okay, that's fair.
And then the boards and superintendent mutually agree to a separation or something like that.
What about that? Notice of, is there a vacancy there's a vacancy if the superintendent dies?
Yes, there's always.
Is there a vacancy if the superintendent is
Disabled?
incapacitated? Yeah. Do we need the 25th Amendment?
I was just thinking the same thing.
What is the law? Let's just start there.
What kind of scenario do we need where
If the
one of
assistant
them-
superintendent for curriculum and instruction deems the superintendent incapacitated.
You need the whole cabinet.
I
You need the
remember
whole
a
cabinet.
story, and Chris, I don't know if this is before your time, but I remember hearing a story years ago about years before that when there were such vacancies in administration in Reading that you had the board members like doing administrative duties temporarily.
That doesn't shock me even a little bit.
Yeah,
I mean, that was like in the 70s, but still.
yeah,
That was
I
like 3
mean,
months ago or 2 months
yeah.
ago.
yeah. I mean, it was all hands on deck at a certain point. Okay, so do we want to say, or upon notification to the board of the death of the superintendent?
Or you could just put a catch-all, any other condition that would terminate his contract.
Yeah, I like that better. Or as specified in his, or pursuant to his contract,
Yeah.
because, yeah,
Because we account for death in the contract?
you will always, you should.
Any other condition pursuant?
I mean, you could even go even broader. Any other condition pursuant to contract or Connecticut state law that would create a vacancy. Like, for example, if his certification were revoked.
That's a good one.
That's the Paul Vallis Bridgeport problem.
Okay. That wasn't so hard. Okay.
Step 0, done.
Done. Okay. Step 2, and I think this brings us to when there is a vacancy.
Yeah, when there is a vacancy, the chair shall promptly notify all of their boards.
Yeah.
That would be the first step.
Okay.
Then the next one would be that the chairs are working together or whatever.
A timeline and methodology for hiring a superintendent in appropriately expeditious fashion.
I mean, I'm not even sure they work to define a timeline and methodology anymore. Now they might just be working to define a timeline because we're about to set forth the methodology.
Exactly.
Mhm.
But I think methodology could mean, are we going to hire a search consultant? That
I
kind
think
of thing.
we're gonna address that in
Yep.
step 700 here when we say that the personnel search committee, steering committee, chairperson from one town gets to make that decision or something.
Yep. Okay, good.
Then I would say that the chairs shall work together for a timeline. The chairs shall convene a tri-board meeting for the purpose of establishing a personnel search committee. And I would even say promptly convene too.
Okay.
The boards, the 3 boards shall meet and create a personnel search committee. I mean, if you want to go crazy, pursuant to Congen Stat 1-200 sub 7, like,
The only person in the world who will remember the statutory reference.
because I just looked it up to argue with somebody the other day. So, yeah.
Maybe a committee of the whole.
I mean, do you want to just say that that to establish a personnel search committee, which shall consist of all members of all 3 boards? just cut to the chase
Sure.
and not have a debate as to who's going to sit on it?
Sure.
Then the question is, now let's talk about that subcommittee or whatever it is.
Right. What we did in the spring was the board created 2 committees
Right.
at the board level. And I think that is a process that is transparent and reasonable.
Right. Yeah.
Because you don't want to have the personnel search committee need to convene a public meeting for the purpose of appointing its own subcommittee.
Right.
That just adds mechanics. If you can also appoint the personnel search committee subcommittee, well, the now personnel search committee is meeting jointly because they're committees of the whole. They're meeting
Yep.
as 3 boards anyway.
Yep.
The 3 boards shall also form a personnel search committee steering committee. I feel like Dr. Seuss, which shall consist of
I was just gonna say, take that snippet and
equal
play it back
representation.
2 times fast.
Yeah. Could we couldn't we say that there's an evergreen personnel search committee which consists of all members of all the boards?
I don't think you can under the statute. I think the personnel search committee exists
Okay.
for the purpose of filling a vacancy.
Okay. All right. Then do we want to call that an ad hoc? An ad hoc personnel search committee consisting of all members of each of the boards? Or no? It doesn't help. Okay, moving on. The subcommittee, that's very muddy to me. It's unclear, sort of the personnel search committee versus the personnel search committee steering committee. Like, that's awful.
Well, why don't we just find a new name?
Yes, please.
But go back when we say the chair shall form a personnel search committee consisting of the members of the boards. Do you want to also clarify that the personnel search committee shall be chaired by the then current chair of the tri-boards?
Yes.
Search committee consisting of all members of each of the boards.
My connection's kind of crappy, so I don't know what you're hearing.
Yep.
I can't hear anything.
And chaired by the current, what would we say? The current chair of the tri-board meeting?
It should be the then chair of the tri-boards.
Right. However we defined it in the document.
Yeah, let me see if I can steal that. Currently chair, okay. And meeting governance, okay. Rotational chair.
I have this visual image of somebody just spinning around and around and around in
Yeah.
a chair when you
Yeah.
say that.
That's what it feels like sometimes, Maureen.
Yeah, that's my sense.
Okay. So we have the chair, we have the meeting and members, sort of all the members. What are we calling the group of people who are actually going to go do the first round interviews, choose the search consultant, all that?
Can that be the ad hoc committee?
Does that, I mean, I'm just, the part that I'm struggling with is I don't think most of the regular board members understand, would understand this process at all, as it, what we just did could
Right.
articulate that. And I would love this to be something that the average citizen could go, that's how we hire superintendents. I get it.
Right. Or the
It's
press.
documented where we're at.
They could say, I can write a story about this in a way
Yeah.
that
Yeah. We should start assigning this, we should assign the policy work to students as government work.
the hiring advisory committee
Hiring Advisory Committee. I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good.
Shall be a subcommittee of the Personnel Search Committee. Because the important part here is that the Hiring Advisory Committee also needs to be considered a PSC under state law, so it can meet in non-meeting.
Okay. Personnel Search Committee consisting of all members of each of the boards and chaired by the then rotational chair of the tri-boards. Are we saying that at that meeting, we will also assign a subset of members, blah, 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 this thing here, but you equally represent?
In addition, a hiring advisory committee shall be established
By the Personnel Search Committee.
Equal representation between, yeah, so is that that's the board chair who's appointing members to the hiring advisory committee, correct? Board chairs?
well,
Is that correct?
that would be correct. It's a question of whether or not we are creating, so bear with me. If the Personnel Search Committee is a 21-person committee,
Yes.
chaired by the tri-board chair,
Yes.
if the Hiring Advisory Committee is a subcommittee of the Personnel Search Committee, the person with appointment power is only the chair of the Personnel Search Committee.
Ah,
If it is a tri-board committee that stands alone, but it's also a Personnel Search Committee under the statute, in theory, then we could say that each of the three chairs can appoint 2 members to the committee, or equal representation, something like that. And it's a question of where you're concentrating that appointment authority.
Yeah, I don't think it would be appropriate to say that the rotational chair has the appointment power.
right.
I think it makes much more sense to vest that in the individual boards.
Right.
We just have to make sure that we're articulating that in a clear way.
Yes. So can you do that?
Okay, Chris, it's on you.
The star-bellied Sneetches have stars on their bellies.
And I have a hard stop in 5 minutes.
I do at 10 too, so, not even- maybe a minute of 10, like maybe 9:59. 1 minute to transition, you know?
The board chairs, in addition, the board shall create a hiring advisory committee, which itself shall be a personnel search committee as defined under Connecticut law. And this would be small caps personnel search committee. The hiring advisory committee shall be charged with the, you could say all work up until a final interview. You have to kind of work back now from what is the PSC, the big PSC doing, and what level of involvement do all 21 members have?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the fundamental question from which you have to work backwards to decide what the hiring advisory committee can do.
That's right.
Because if the personnel search committee only ratifies the decision at the end, that's one thing. But if they're going to be involved in the final round process and they say they get to interview the last 2 or 3 people, then you have to sort of set that parameter here.
Right. Yeah, agreed.
And I'm not sure we're solving that in 3 minutes.
No, I don't think we are.
Not.
No,
I think this is where you stop, folks.
I think so. I think so too. And I think we come back to this next Friday and we'll have more progress, and we'll also have some guidance from learnings from our process with the negotiating committee. All right. Very good. Well, that is some progress. Let's see. I think that takes us to item number 6, public comment. No public being present. Moved on to committee member comment. Any comments? Okay. All right.
Fun tonight, you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Motion. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye, and aye. We are adjourned at 9:57 a.m.
Thank
you
you,
very much.
guys.
Thanks,
See you
everybody.
later.
Bye,